So, okay, well, people on the left, actually paying attention. People on the right have pizza. Everyone wins. So, hi everyone. Welcome to London Apple Admins at ThoughtWorks. So, welcome back. For those of you who've been to ThoughtWorks before, we've hosted a couple of times before. So, thanks to my colleagues for letting me steal the kitchen. And huge thanks to Data Jar for making pizza and additional beers happen. The deal was the office manager said you could help yourself to any beers left. There's nothing. I found some pictures of beer to send to Graham Gilbert, but there's not much. I know I'm a monster. So hi, I'm Steve. I work here at ThoughtWorks. So I figure I'm honor bound to mention something about the company. So we're a global IT consultancy. It's now 40 offices in 14 countries, and I'm sure it was 30 last time I looked. I've given up on that one. There's lots of offices. So we're a consultancy. We help our clients solve tricky problems by building awesome custom software that helps them differentiate themselves from their competition. And we do that using a lot of Macs, which I guess is where I come in. So I should probably I'll share some deck. Yeah. So I'm actually part of the ThoughtWorks identity team, which is an internal tech ops team. So identity looks after all sorts of stuff. So I guess primarily our single sign-on, so tools like Okta. We're responsible for killing AD. There's a Harry Potter metaphor there somewhere about Horcruxes that you take a DC out and there's another one and another one. But we're in the middle of pulling all the DCs out as well. And at some point, someone decided that mobile device management is about the identity of a laptop. So I'm identity team, and so that's my problem now as well. So obviously here we are at London Apple Admins. So I'd like to talk to you all. Oh, I'm forgetting, of course, right? I haven't been to one of these for ages. There's a reason. Yeah. Thank you very much. So what this basically means is I'm not sleeping. This was done last minute last night, and it may or may not be coherent. Thank you, Rufus. So obviously we're going to talk about Microsoft because that's what people at London Apple Admin events talk about. Although it feels like this would have been a bizarre thing to say maybe 5 years ago, but now you look in the Slack channel, you see the Office team reaching out and sort of wanting to help and make things better. Microsoft are a lot fluffier than they ever used to be. But the reason we're talking Microsoft is we're blaming Canada. So last year, I was fortunate enough to get to go to Mac DevOps in Vancouver. So it's a really awesome conference. It's really small, close-knit, very friendly, pretty techy, but cool. And the tickets are pretty reasonable, but then you've got to fly to Vancouver, which is a fairly expensive place. But if you get the chance to go, I would highly recommend it. It's awesome. And I saw a talk from this woman here. Her name's Jessica Dean, and she's a DevOps advocate at Microsoft working with Azure. So she did a talk about Kubernetes, and I smiled and nodded and didn't really understand anything that she said. And then she did a lightning talk called Build Anything using Visual Studio Team Services. And so she demoed this notion that you could build, Microsoft have hosted Linux, Windows, and surprisingly Mac boxes in the cloud. And so you can use Microsoft infrastructure to build stuff. And there's in fact a free tier as well, so you can get started for free and have a play around with Microsoft, which is pretty cool. So the thing is, yeah, like I say, it looked interesting, but I'm like, yeah, continuous integrated CD DevOps pipelines. This is real developer stuff, and I just mess around with Macs, right? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? But actually, as you start looking and you look at these pipelines, you sort of discover that pipelines are really just, it's just a series of steps that you run, and half those steps are just, bash scripts anyway. So, if you can write a bash script, and I just about can, no apologies for reusing this. If you write a bash script, then you can probably write yourself a pipeline. And actually, if writing pipelines, so Azure uses YAML, you define your pipeline using markup language. But if the YAML bit's a bit of a step too far, actually, Microsoft have a UI, like a GUI, where you can build your stuff. So last night, I basically figured that it would be much more fun watching videos of me doing this rather than actually doing it live. But basically, Microsoft provided this GUI, so you can assemble your first pipeline using some fluffy drag and drop type stuff. So this is me creating a brand new project. You link it to a Git repository of some description, and then you can fire up the GUI part and start dragging and dropping and building things. Yeah, so we're going to create a new build pipeline. I also feel like having sort of countered this with the lack of sleep and the floating dog, I'm sure I am using this product wrong, but at the same time, I'm able to build things with it which are really useful for what I need to do, so it's kind of cool. I probably should have started with that context, really. So we're rolling out MDM, and we're delivering install applications as part of that MDM process. And as I'm sure all of you know, you need to sign those packages that you deliver with an MDM. So what we wanted to do is, can we sign packages automatically on a schedule in the cloud? And where can we do that? Who's got hosted Macs? So we went looking. I think Mac Stadium for our own hosted Mac seemed a bit overkill. I think Circle CI have something. I think Travis might have something, but I'm like, hang, didn't I see a talk? It might be this lady from Microsoft. So yeah, Azure is basically, there's a free tier and you get a certain number of, I think, hours per month where you can run stuff. So I'm running all of this in my personal Outlook.com account, which I think all I actually use it for. So now when I go into Outlook Mail, all I see is failed builds. Sorry, working builds. So again, here's an example. So here's our nice GUI, and I'd like to run, I don't know, a shell script. So again, you've got all these example things you can do. And so I want to run a simple command line. So thanks, Microsoft, for explaining how shell works. And then we can add some stuff. So what we'll do at this point, I'm going to do a git clone. Wish I could type faster. I can do a git clone of something like monkey package. So there we go. And now I can save and run this. And now I get to build stuff and run and waste Microsoft's time effectively, because I now get to run this code on a Microsoft hosted server somewhere. Cool. So this supports as well, you can run stuff using continuous integration. So it's triggered when you commit new code, or you can just trigger it on a cron schedule. So you can set it to run every night. So at the moment, I've got stuff that's building every night. But here you go. It sets up the agent, it clones some stuff, and it's done. So not a particularly exciting example, but a real world example of I made a Microsoft server do something for free. So then that's kind of cool. But then the problem you've got is that I guess your £1,000 gorilla in the room or the cloud is Amazon. So I think Microsoft are well aware of the fact that all the cool kids use Amazon or maybe GCP, and that Azure has to play catch up. And so someone's written a really nice integration. There's an official integration that allows you to integrate your AWS and your Azure. So what we found is, rather than, because we can't do stuff in AWS, there's no hosted Macs, we can do the hosted Mac stuff in Azure, then we can output stuff to S3 buckets or pass it on to another pipeline in Amazon and make Amazon do things, which is fun. So then this is a really boring video just showing that, yes, so I signed into S3 and I created some credentials, and I can link the two. So I create a service connection, and you can, I guess, scope that. So I think I created a user here that has S3 full access, but you can create a user with different permissions depending on what you need to do. So here's an example of something I built last night, which actually almost kind of does something. So we can install the AWS command line tools. We can clone monkey package. We can build one of the example packages. If you've used monkey package, you'll know that Greg includes a couple of packages built in. So we build that, and then finally we S3 upload that to Amazon. So I don't discover I now got all the wrong windows open. Yeah, so I can keep that. The other thing that's going to be fun with this, oh good, you'd think there'd actually be a button that would let me actually run something. The other thing that's really fun with this I've discovered is, I don't know where these boxes are hosted, but I'm going to guess they're in North America somewhere. And what I find is, in the mornings I can do build after build after build, and everything's really, really fast. And what I find is when North America wakes up, everything grinds to a halt. So luckily, none of them are awake. Yeah, they're all awake now. So we may see some queuing. But here you go. So I ain't ready for the job. I need like hold music or something. AWS CLI. And then the other thing that's really nice about this is it actually supports, you can upload your signing certificates as well. So you upload those as a secure file. You have the password on that file as a secure variable, so then you can build and sign packages on a schedule, which is what we're using it for. But the other thing that's really nice, actually, is ignoring the fact the documents are patchy. Once you built this in the UI, you can export that out to YAML. So it gives you an example of what the syntax should look like. So between building in the UI, exporting it to YAML, reading the docs, and experimenting, that's kind of how I've learned it, really. So the learning curve is sort of, it does that. Some things aren't documented as well as they would be in a tool like Amazon, but it's pretty neat nonetheless. So I think actually I'm forgetting what I need to do as well on my management console is just double check the timestamp on my exciting bucket, and we'll prove that something actually happened. Look at that, we built a package today at 7:23. Thank you very much, Microsoft. And then I guess, slides. And then I guess, so as a real world example, so I've got some code right now that this is currently running. So at the moment, we've got a bunch of stuff in S3. So we're using install applications, and we're hosting stuff in S3. So at the moment, I build out our entire MDM flow. So all the packages, all the scripts, all the things we're delivering with install applications are all defined as infrastructure as code. And then I can hit a button and it will sit in queue for forever. So basically, each time I do this, I'm building a new version of all the packages we're delivering. So it's not very much, to be honest. It's some antivirus, a couple of shell scripts and things to get set up. But what it means is I can build all of this, and rebuild it, and rebuild it. And my favorite bit, actually, is the bit where I curl down the latest Sophos installer and rebuild that on the fly. We're pulling down dep notify, and we're compiling and building that as well, and punting it all into Amazon S3 as if by magic. And it's pretty cool. I think the only real gotchas I found is, as I mentioned, the documentation could be better. It's pretty obvious that, you know, there's this notion that the command line documentation is really detailed and means nothing. There's not much at the beginning level either. So there's been an awful lot of trial, error, and swearing. So as an example, so when you upload, I said you can upload a signing certificate. So you upload a signing certificate, and then you export your YAML, and it's referenced in the YAML, and it has this unique ID. And there is nowhere that tells you where the hell that unique ID comes from. And there was screaming and sobbing, and then I clicked on the thing in the UI, went to the browser bar and went, oh, it's defined in the browser. Fine. But yeah. So what I've done is, let me go. 7% again. So huge anti-climate says there's not many more slides left. So basically, so here's an example of, you know, that very basic hello world stuff. I can export the YAML out, display name script, and I told you it's just bash script. Who am I kidding? And that's what that looks like. So between, as I say, getting started in the GUI, read the docs, explore what you can do, and actually you can do some kind of cool stuff in Azure. So this is a QR code. So I know I put a QR code in some slides, and all the cool kids seem to. It just takes you back to that Git repo. But there's a bunch of stuff I can imagine we could use this for. So I'm thinking it would be fun to allow like a package signing service. So a colleague of mine on the other side of the world writes a printer installer. She commits it to GitHub. It's picked up by this, signed, spat out into an S3 bucket, and I don't have to share Apple signing credentials with half the company. Stuff like that. I can imagine it would be an awesome thing to run stuff like auto packaging, actually. Like auto package, you know, check for a few recipes, sync them up if you're running a lightweight auto package monkey setup. Because you've now got all the monkey in the cloud, monkey in a box type stuff. So I could imagine this being a really nice part of that. So rather than relying on a hosted Mac in your data center or on your desk, you could maybe spin it up. I'm not sure how it would scale if you had an awful lot of stuff, but I can imagine for a lightweight 3 or 4 packages type thing, it'd be pretty cool. The other bit that's really confusing, and hopefully Microsoft aren't watching this, is there's a free tier, and no one will tell me how much it's actually supposed to cost. And all my free stuff just keeps working. So you're supposed to get a certain number of hours per month. You know, I think they charge it for parallel jobs, but I'm just, you know, I'm running one job. And as you saw that real world example, it builds in about 1.5 minutes. So at the moment, I've got a scheduled task running every night to regenerate install applications. And I've got that code I showed you for building out the S3 bucket, which I trigger whenever I commit changes to that code, you know, change a script, rebuild something, it just rebuilds the whole lot. Each time it runs for about 1 minute. So I can't see me getting anywhere near the free usage limit for what I'm doing. So there you go. How I got to talk about Microsoft in a room full of Apple admins. Questions? Little boy, he's called Rufus. He doesn't like to sleep. John, yeah. It's a very good, so the question was, how does Microsoft do hosted Macs? And I have no idea. Neil and I were talking about that in the off license just before. We're gonna guess they probably use something like Mac Stadium. Because I was as surprised as anyone else, to be honest. Like I saw Jessica's talk and went, huh, what, really? I think I went to the Slack channel, I asked, does anyone know, what can I do like CI builds on? I think Graham's like, no, there's nothing. But are you sure? Because I saw a talk. Okay. I think that ran to exactly 15 minutes, Neil. So we're now just 15 minutes late. Thanks very much.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Jump straight into my ones. Thank you very much, Steve. Still up there. So this is all about the Adobe User Sync tool, or as I say, I've got that syncing feeling, or how to break your admin console. I'm Neil. Hello. You can find me on these things, and I use that name. And I've got a blog. Oh dear. However, before I get into this, Adobe have been busy. Thank you. Adobe have been very busy indeed, haven't they? They've just released something, as you probably know, called shared device licensing. Has anyone taken the plunge yet? This talk's not about shared device licensing, but Darren will talk about it. I've put together this slide with some resources to talk about SDL, as we call it. We've got our own glossary now, because all the different license types that Adobe make mean we have to do that. So we've got Ben's blog. I was going to plug Darren's talk next week for the Utah Apple Admins meetup, but he's doing it tonight here. So we've got that coming up next. There is a webinar from Adobe themselves. And I wrote about my experiences when I tried to break it. So you can read all about those here. However, on to today. First, I'm going to talk about what identity is and what it means to Adobe when you're working in the admin console. And then we'll look at the user sync tool itself and some of the things you need to do when you set it up, preparing it, testing it, etc. And then other things you need to think about when you're actually using it. Some other gotchas. So, identity. Let's talk about that. So one of the things you will need to think about now, if you are managing deploying Adobe products, is the identity that your users are going to use. Especially with shared device licensing, they need an identity to sign into it. Up until now, with the old device licensing, device pool, I think they called it, and the serial licensing, you didn't need to log into that. You just use the apps. Those days are pretty much gone. So Adobe give you a few different kinds of IDs you can use. Adobe IDs, all by themselves. They belong to the users themselves, and they're tied to that user's email address. It could be any email address. The password and the authentication is all handled and managed by Adobe and the user. However, you can grant named licenses to Adobe IDs in your admin console. So I believe you can. You can add them and then give them named licenses and then take them away. But the Adobe IDs still exist and you can't do anything with those. You have enterprise IDs. Just really a step further. Your organization creates and owns those. And they're associated with your user's organizational email address, their work or school email. However, all the passwords, the authentication is all managed and owned by Adobe. So your users have a separate password to manage. And the final kind of ID, Star Trek, is the federated ID. Exactly the same as the enterprise ID. However, the passwords, authentication, and is all managed through your own identity provider via SSO and SAML. To be honest, these take quite a bit of setting up at your end, but they do, in my opinion, give your users the best experience if you are using an identity provider for them. If you are not using enterprise or federated IDs yet, and you want to, you will need to claim your domain in the Adobe Admin Console and set up the SSO relationship and everything else. And there are some instructions here on how to do it. Adobe's documentation is very vast on this subject. They've been rewriting it recently. It's got a lot better. Oh, yes. And if, I believe in some environments, if you're working with the schools, anyone here working with schools, kids under 13, that kind of age, Adobe are saying you can't have users in those environments sign into shared device licensing with regular Adobe IDs. So you actually have to provide them with enterprise or federated. So watch out for that one. So you've decided the which IDs you're going to use, the identity type, and now you want to create them in your admin console. There's a few ways to do it. You can take the artisanal option, make them one by one. I think last count, I think we've got 25,000 students and 2,000 staff, so that's going to take a while. And then you've got to assign them their product profiles, like the software licenses that they're going to get as well, all by hand, artisanally. You can do a bulk CSV import as well. And that's really difficult to see, but if you import a CSV file, you can assign product profiles or product configurations to that as well. So the process gets a little bit more automated, but then every time the users in your organization change, people leave, you have to keep repeating this process again and again and again. It gets very boring very quickly. So that brings us to the user sync tool. Is anyone using this? Wow. So the user sync tool is a Python script that lives on GitHub. You run it on one of your computers, and it reads all your users from a source, such as, it could do it from a CSV file, or a directory service that you can connect to with LDAP. So Active Directory is supported with this. I believe LDAP in Azure is as well, if you've spun up an LDAP instance there. I've been told that works. It's also got an Okta connector. I have no experience of using that, but it's there. And it takes all those user accounts and then it performs actions on them in your admin console using Adobe's User Management API, or the UM API. You can read all about the UM API down here if you want to go down that rabbit hole. So we have our directory over here, for example. And we have our admin console over here, and we've got our red group and our blue group. Yep. So this can, the sync tool can create identities for your directory users in your admin console. In they go. It can assign them product profiles. Product profiles are essentially groups of settings for your product. So you can have one for Spark, for example, one for all the apps. So the red team, or the red group, gets the whole of Creative Cloud. The blue group gets Spark. If a user were to leave the organization, and they're not in your directory anymore, no deal for them. The sync tool can see that they've gone, their account's been disabled, or they've been taken out of this group, one or the other, and it will remove or can remove any products that are assigned to them. No more licenses for you, Prime Minister. And if you like, it can also remove the user from the admin console as well, taking their cloud storage with them. Watch out. We'll talk about what happens when you delete users in a little while. If a user's membership changes, the sync tool can update their product assignments accordingly. And it can also ignore or not act on or exclude certain IDs in your admin console by, say, identity type. So you can exclude pure Adobe IDs from any action, or enterprise or federated, depending on which ones you want to manage. It can do it by group assignment, or it can do it by a regular expression that matches the username or email address. This might be useful, for example, if you are federating all your IDs and you have one single Adobe ID that's your system administrator in the admin console. You probably don't want to have your user sync tool touch that in case your SSO breaks and you can't log in anymore. You need that way in. Moving on. Oh, this is a preparation. So what do we have to do to prepare ourselves, our environments, to use this thing? The first thing is have a look at all the documentation that Adobe provide. There are two main sources here. They've got this new guide about around setting up the user sync tool that's really nice, really easy to read, and it will get you up and running really quickly. But I think the real meat of this is in the setup and success guide. It covers a lot more scenarios. It's got a lot. It mentions a lot more advanced sort of deployment practices that you should be thinking about when you're setting things up. And everything I'm talking about from this point forward is actually covered in these guides. So the first thing you do is you get yourself a certificate. You generate one. This is needed so that your user sync tool can talk securely to Adobe's user management API. It's quite straightforward to generate. You can use OpenSSL to do it in, say, Terminal on Mac OS or Cygwin on Windows. I'd say watch out because the documentation says we recommend you create the certificate for and give it a 3-year expiry. But then the command it gives you says 365 days. If this certificate does expire, then your user sync tool will stop syncing users. You just need to renew it. No, it just won't sync. It will say it can't talk to the UST can't. Sorry? Yep, so your question was, does anything break when your certificate expires? All that happens is the user sync tool can't talk to the user management API. So when it tries to perform any actions on accounts in your admin console, it just gets denied. It's communicating all over HTTPS all the time to do that. If you've never generated one of these things before, OpenSSL does ask you a few questions. I'm not sure that it really matters to the user sync tool how you answer these questions, like your country name, your state or province, email address, things like that. But in the kind of spirit of good practice, I'd say use the typical values that your organization would use for other certificates. When you've done that, you'll end up with a couple of files. You have your public certificate and your private key. Keep your private key safe. And don't open it in Keynote, no. And then head straight over to the Adobe I/O site to create your integration. You'd sign into the Adobe I/O site with your with the same Adobe ID you use to log into your admin console as system administrator. you create a new integration. There's a service account, and it has to be one that you click Access API, and then you choose User Management API, and then you give it your public certificate. Yes. Even Adobe recommend self-signed, although you can use one that's not. But yeah, it's just for the sync tool to talk to Adobe, so it's running on your own server. You're not using it publicly at all. But yeah, self-signed is a dirty word. And when you look at your integration after you've created it, you'll see some details here you need to remember for later. For your client credentials, the user sync tool is going to want those. And then we move on to the server, the computer you're going to run the sync tool on in your organization. It can be Windows, it can be Linux. There are a few distributions that are directly supported. I think CentOS and Ubuntu. I can't remember if Red Hat Enterprise is. We run it on Windows at our place. It can also run on the Mac. Whatever you choose to run it on, you need to install Python, and the version of Python needs to match the version that was used to build the sync tool that you download, and it's in the file name, so it's quite easy to find. On Windows, you have to create an environment variable called pex_root. And if you're going to run this as a scheduled task, you probably want to run it under a service account. This is because some of the credentials that the user sync tool accesses to talk to the user management API and your LDAP server are stored, or can be stored, in your Windows credential store, or a credential store of your OS that you're running it on, so like your keychain or whatever. Okay, then you grab the user sync tool from GitHub. It's a good idea to watch the repo for new releases and then choose the release that best suits your environment. And they list a whole load there as well. So you want to pick the one that matches your target OS. So yeah, the CentOS, Ubuntu, and Windows. And they've built versions for Python 2.7 and Python 3.6. I don't know why, but then Adobe advise you pick the one for Python 3.6. And you grab the examples file too. And now we're ready to try and set it up. So you want to unzip the two files you downloaded into a folder on your server directory. In the examples zip file, there's another folder in there called config files basic, and you will extract those 3 files out of that. And interesting, Steve, you were talking about YAML. These are YAML as well. So there's lots of YAML's cool. And you probably want to put your private key in the same folder as well. You're going to need that too. YAML. Yet another markup language. What is it? YAML. YAML. Ah. .yaml. It's Adobe, isn't it? YAML. So we're going to dive into those YAML files because you have to start editing those next. These are example ones. And I'm going to sort of talk through a little bit about how I set those up and the things that I changed for my environment. The first one is all about the user management API connector. So it's what your sync tool is going to use to connect to the user management API to do actions on your users in your admin console. So we'll go down to the enterprise section, and all you do is you grab your credentials from your Adobe I/O integration, and you put them there. So that's your client secret and all these other very sensitive things stored in a file in plain text. No problems there. And that's all you have to do for that one. The next one, if I'm assuming a lot of people here will probably be connecting to an LDAP style directory. I did. So I open the LDAP connector next. It's quite a lot to do here. So we start with the details that we need to connect to our directory server, including the username and password of an account that has read access to it in plain text. You can specify an LDAP with an S URL as well to make it encrypted. And as we start to move down, loads of other things to edit. In my environment, I changed the group filter format. So as you look through the comments, these are quite well documented. And they suggest if you're using Active Directory, you just use this for your group filter format instead of the statement here that's more generic. I also had to change the group member filter format to this. Otherwise, when the sync tool was looking up group membership, it would not look up any users that are in nested groups. And our structure, so we have like an all staff and an all students AD group, which is what I want to sync up. Those AD groups contain other AD groups which relate to those students or staff departments. So we need to look inside those nestings to actually find the users. I suspect quite a few environments will probably do something similar as well. So that's something you have to change. Another thing we had to do in our environment was change or was tell the user sync tool that our users' usernames for the accounts it's creating in the admin console are not based around the email address, they're based around the user principal name. Does anyone else work in a place where the user principal name is different from the email address? So there's quite a few. So that's something you'd have to do. If you don't do this, so if you don't specify a username format and tell it that it's user principal name, then your federation won't work because your SSO provider expects the UPN, not the email address. So I mean, in our environment, we have, say, our users get an AD username, like the SAM account name, and then let's say Steve, but the email address, the mail field, will be something nicer that people can remember. The UPN is just the username at the organization domain. And the next thing was I uncommented this one and specified that the country code would be GB. So Adobe IDs have to have a country code specified. I found if it wasn't specified here, our directory doesn't include an attribute for it. And so the log file fills up with loads of errors and the accounts don't get synced up. So now we move on to the final file, the user sync config. This one defines all the settings for the user sync tool itself. And the first thing you want to think about is which identity types, so your Adobe, your federated, your enterprise, which ones you want to exclude, which ones you don't want to work on in here. Well, these are the ones that EUST will ignore. So you just add an entry for all the types you want to exclude. I added enterprise ID to mine because we're using federated IDs. And I commented this one out because the LDAP connector is already supplying a default country code. Now this is the juicy bit where you tell, so under the group section, where you tell the user sync tool which directory groups will be mapped to which product profiles in your admin console, so what licenses people are going to get depending on what AD groups they're in or directory groups they're in. So for us, we do this. So we have an all staff directory group. They get assigned an Adobe group or a product profile. The two terms are sort of interchangeable, called Staff Complete Plan. That's a product profile of all the Adobe apps and all the cloud services enabled for them. They get 100 gig of cloud storage. The all students group gets Spark with 2 gigs of cloud storage. They're allowed that one under our enterprise agreement. This one here is interesting. So we've got a directory group called Adobe Admin Console Administrators. If you're in that one, you get added to an Adobe group called _support_admin. That's a special group, which anyone added to that gets assigned the support admin role in the Adobe console. So you can use the Use Sync tool to manage your administrators quite easily. You just stick them in an AD group. When a new person joins your IT team, put them there, it syncs them up. Adobe define a few of those. The system admin one, that's the king of the castle, your root level one, has a star next to it, and actually the Use Sync tool will not sync that or manage it, even though there is a name for it here. It won't work. There we go. This setting, max Adobe only users, is really, really important. It's a little bit difficult to explain, but it's a bit of a safeguard. It makes sure that the sync tool won't change or perform actions on a large number of users or a number of users greater than that number if it sees that that many or more have changed in your directory service. So if there's been a misconfiguration or problem with it connecting to your directory service, and then it sees there's a mismatch in the admin console and it's greater than that number of users, it will just not do anything. So you may need to increase this in your environments if you expect your sort of every run of the sync tool to manipulate more than 200 users at a time. I hope that makes sense. And also by default, the sync tool does log to a file, and it creates that file with a date stamp at the beginning. It doesn't really do any log rotations, so that's something you might want to keep an eye on, or you might have another tool rotate that log file around for you. In our environment, I actually disable this, and I just have kind of standard output log to a file, the same file every time the sync tool runs, and we monitor it with a monitoring tool that watches that file for words like error, warning, and then generates an alert if there is a problem. You might enable logging when you're first setting this up and testing it just to troubleshoot. Or you might do something more sophisticated than me and set up something to do proper log rotation. And finally, you have this thing, invocation defaults. This is new in the new version of this sync tool. I think with 2.4 they added this. When you run the sync tool, you can specify a number of parameters after the command. They are documented here. All this means is if you don't specify those parameters, you can actually tell the sync tool to use these defaults instead. So if you don't specify a parameter, it will just look here and use whatever you've set here and run that way. So you've set everything up, you're really happy, and it's time to run the tool. Whoops. Should have really tested it first. So for testing, there is a parameter that's really, really helpful, just -t or -- test mode. If you run the sync tool with that anywhere after the command, it will run in test mode. It won't actually perform any changes, but it will log output and act as if it's actually doing the things it's supposed to do. So you can get an idea of what it's going to do, but your admin console is safe. When you do need to do a live change or try a live change out for the first time, and you want to see how it does change the user in your admin console, you can filter with the user filter parameter against a specific user and then exclude all the Adobe side users from any other actions that the tool might perform. So it only affects that user at a time. If you want to see how a new product assignment works against you, for example. Follow the advice here. Moving on to profit. And some more things to think about. So we were talking about security considerations. You saw all the credentials for the sync tool to use to connect you to directory service, and the user management API are all just stored in plain text in these YAML files. That's kind of bad. However, in the success guide, there is this really, really good advice around how you can make use of your OS's secure credential storage mechanism and store those secure credentials in there, and then you just change a few of those entries in that in your YAML files so that they point to your OS's secure storage and look up the credentials from there instead of them being in the files in plain text. For Windows as well, you probably want to encrypt your private key certificate. For other OSs, you can actually store the private key in the OS's credentials store, and the user sync tool can just look it up from there if it's running as a user that has access to that. For Windows, it doesn't, so you want to encrypt that, and then you store the encryption passphrase in your credential store instead. Account deletion is a kind of interesting one. So this is what happens to those Adobe IDs, or those identities in the Adobe admin console when users in your directory have been disabled, removed, people have left the organization, that kind of thing. Because if you do remove them, they lose their cloud storage. So, and the sync tool doesn't have a way to sort of remove them after a certain amount of time or anything like that. It's pretty stupid in that regard. With GDPR, we've got to think about how long we're holding on to personal information and storing it. So even though users have left their organization, they're going to still have some identity in that sync tool. If we're using SAML and federated IDs, they can't log in and use anything because our identity providers don't authenticate them anyway. So Adobe do have a page all about helping you decide how you're going to manage deleting those accounts. So that's, again, really, really worth reading before you dive in and start using this tool. You'll probably want to schedule it when you've got it set up on your servers to run in an automated fashion. And they have a page here on how to do that as well. What we do is we have a couple of Windows servers. We have one at one physical site and one at another physical site. And one server runs a sync at 1 AM and the other server runs a sync at 1 PM. So there's a little bit of resilience built into that as well. Do you want your users to get emails when they're assigned a product? Because by default they will. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Depends on your organization. So yeah, they'll get a nice email from Adobe saying, you've got access to all this stuff now, go and log in. You have to edit your product profiles and turn those notifications off before you start running the sync tool. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of emails flying about. You may also have users that create Adobe IDs based on their organizational or work or school email address. So they've already got their own personal ones, and then you've created enterprise or federated IDs that use the same email address that they've already got an Adobe ID for. You can do that, that's fine, it works. What will happen though is when your users try and sign into the Adobe website or one of the apps, they'll get this dialogue, because I'm one of these people. And they just need a little bit of guidance, user education on how to handle that and what to do so they don't panic. So yeah, depending on where they click, that's the ID they're going to sign into, and they'll receive certain license entitlements or not, depending on which one they sign into and use. So it does handle it pretty well. Yep.
If I sign to one and change my mind, is it full sign out and sign in?
Yes. I think you have to sign out, sign in again. What do you mean by switch? Sorry, Daz.
So if you pick personal account, your company didn't have to do a full Adobe log out and log in again.
Oh no, so this actually comes up as soon as you enter your email address, and then you tab down to the password box. It will recognize that there are two identities associated to the email address, and then it will present this. So you haven't actually signed in yet before you see this. So yeah, you can switch out. Yeah. Yeah. Managed Apple IDs. Yeah. They don't do SSO, nothing yet, do they? Finally, you'd be glad to know, is Adobe are well aware that a lot of people are now looking into creating enterprise and federated IDs in their admin consoles because of the advent of shared device licensing. They know it's becoming a thing for a lot of organizations, and they've pulled a lot of resources into providing a lot of support for this now. If you're in a school or university, you may have already had your account managers reach out to you and talk to you about the user sync tool, because we did after we'd set it up. They wanted to come and see if we were all okay. But no, they're really good actually. If you have set it up already, they'll have a look at how you've done it and suggest some best practices and just kind of go over it and give you a bit of a health check. Otherwise, if they haven't got in touch with you, you can just log into the admin console, head to the support tab. I'd say request an expert session and get some help with it. They do fully support this tool. And that's it. So thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions? I don't know. Yep, and sorry, John asked, is there any official support for running this tool on, say, cloud service like AWS Lambda? And I answered that. My answer was, I have no idea. They do talk about connecting to cloud-based directory services now. So they mentioned, say, LDAP in Azure instead of your own LDAP server. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's just a Python script. Yep. And I'd imagine if you were sort of really, really hot on the with your sort of development chops, you could dig into the API and pick it apart and write something. It's all there. It's all documented. Yes, so we've got about 25,000 students and 2,000 staff. And I think the first time I ran this, it took, I'm trying to remember, less than an hour to do the first sync. But it doesn't consume a lot of resource when it's running. It's because when it's doing the API calls to Adobe, they're kind of throttled. So it's just doing like HTTP requests every now and again to churn through. Yeah, it's been fine. So I think some of our students are using Spark. We haven't rolled out shared device licensing yet. We have named user licenses for staff. They use those at the moment. They call it for home use. so they can download the products on their own computers and then sign in there. This has taken a massive burden off of our service desk, who used to just manually assign or artisanally create user accounts when staff would request access to them. Because we've always owned this product, like the Adobe Creative Cloud and the name licensing, but we never, or up until quite recently, we never automated the process of putting our staff into it and giving them the name licenses, which they were entitled to anyway. So the service desk don't ever have to worry about it. No one ever really logs into the admin console anymore, unless it's one of my team to package an app. No, I'm testing it at the moment and breaking it. But we will migrate in the summer. Yep. Cheers. Thank you. Okay. Any final questions? No? Brilliant. I think it's time for a break now, because I've been up here far too long. Have some more pizza, drink, enjoy.
Good evening, everyone. Anyone fancies going to Macaduk and doesn't have a ticket yet? Remind me, I'll put it up at the end as well if I forget. So, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. All right. I will not lie. I was a last minute, probably last on the list substitution for this evening. So you're getting a preview of a very, very rough draft of what I'm going to be delivering on Wednesday. So the technical information should be correct. So if it isn't, please tell me, because that would really be helpful. It's just going to be boring as hell. Only the best. Only the best for the home crowd. Yeah, so Adobe did some new shared device licensing. So I'm going to talk about it. First of all, hopefully most of you know me. Sorry if you do. Systems engineer for DataJar. You can find me on Slack and Twitter as Daz_Wallace, if not Daz Wallace. DataJar, we're an app MSP based in the UK. Jamf partners, integrators, resellers, professional service providers, blah, blah, blah. All the usual stuff. Onto the stuff you wanted me to talk about. First, we do have to go for a bit of a glossary because there will be a lot of shortened terms here for my own sanity. NUL, a named user license or licensing, the one you have your users log in to license their apps that you have deployed for them or they'll download themselves. SDL, the new hotness, shared device licensing or license. That's the new thing that works with CC 2019. I'd love to say that's it, to be honest, but you can guess by the gap there's going to be considerably more. DL, device licensing or license. That's your traditional device license that you'll be deploying nowadays if you're not deploying serial number license. Talking of which, serial number license. That's when you're deploying a serial number. Really high tech and complex. SNL for that one. CC 2018, CC 2019, just Creative Cloud Suite, interchangeable really. 2018 being the older one and 2019 being the newer one. Last one, CCDA. This was actually new to me a couple of weeks ago, but the Creative Cloud desktop app, the thing you'll have your users signing into if you will be deploying 2019. Spoilers. There will be a link at the end. Unfortunately, it won't be a valid link. So bear with me on that. I'll chuck some account on Slack and on the blog feed channel once I've got the slides and some homework for you folks up and available. I lied, there's one more glossary I missed. Creative Cloud Packager, CCP, what you would have probably been using if you're not downloading your pre-packaged items from the admin console. Right, licensing. So today, we've got three primary methods to license your Adobe deployments. NUL, serial number license, or a device license. So named user license, users log in, that's how to license the apps. Serial number license, you deploy a serial number down, that licenses any apps or combination of apps you have. Device license, again, will license any number of apps that you have, or the whole suite if you're really lucky and spent all the money. The device licenses are quite cool in that when you deploy them to a device, that device will show up in your admin console, I believe by the host name. Neil for confirmation, who doesn't have device licenses, I've just realized. The device will show up with its host name in the licensing console, which is quite good to track things down. So, licensing 2019. Those two, the serial number license and the device license, are classed as legacy. They are referred to as serial number, and in brackets, legacy, and device license legacy in documentation to try and avoid the confusion with the new shared device license. There is a difference. It's more than just the word shared, I'm afraid. And Neil previewed a little bit with the user sync tool. So Adobe did announce that at the end of 2018, I believe it was December 31st, that serial number licenses and device licenses are going end of life. Ooh, things are changing. I don't like change. Not saying it's good change. Don't panic. That was clarified with an email directly to customers, just to say that your serial number or device licenses, if you do nothing, will continue to function until they expire. That is, they will function, but not with CC 2019, which needs the new SDL or named user. So, to be honest, if you just didn't do anything, apart from pay Adobe your bill, you'll be good for a little while. Just to elaborate on this a bit further, Adobe have a webinar that I have linked on this non-existent blog post that explains that you can still purchase renewals up till September this year. So in theory, you could stay on 2018 device license till September 2020 if you work out things very well. But at that point, you'll meet your hard stop and you will not have fun. So let's go with some key changes. Named user license or shared device license only. No legacy device license or serial number license for 2019. Thanks, Steve. Twitter. To use these apps, users must sign in with an Adobe ID. Must. That's the same for a named user license, kind of obvious, and shared device licenses. This is a big change compared to serial number and device licenses previously. Ooh. SDL is for education only. They want to push you towards NUL for enterprise. Probably not to do with any kind of user account usage and tracking. I don't know. Speak to Adobe. And Creative Cloud Packager cannot be used to package these apps for 2019. Ooh. No more app only that runs on Macs. No more auto PKG. Sad times. Sorry, got distracted there a lot. Some apps would require the cloud sync to be enabled, namely Lightroom and Premiere Rush CC. So if you're using either of those two apps, you will need to also allow your users to use the Adobe Cloud Sync when they log in. ThoughtWorks is dead. CS6, isn't it? To be fair, I am a little bit with Dave on this one. It's only one I know how to use out the whole suite. Could you just not deploy it and see if they notice? Or deploy a fake app, see if it ever gets launched? Bit extreme. I'd rather the computer didn't blow up when you run something for a customer. Small requirement, possibly. Some clarification around how SDL licenses interact and work. If a user signs in with into an SDL deployment with their own named user license, it will not count as an SDL activation. So it will use their named user license over the shared device license. Don't forget those acronyms. If multiple users sign in on the same Mac into an SDL license, it still will only use one SDL license. It's a pair device license, hence the D in SDL. A lively crowd. And a user's activation is cached. Cheers, Neil, for the testing. If a user logs into a Mac, logs into Adobe, logs out of that Mac, goes home, has a nice time, comes back the next day, they shouldn't have to log in again to Adobe. The Mac, they should probably log in again. Occasionally, they will be asked to reconfirm that it is them who's sitting in front of the Mac. It feels a bit weird. It feels a bit like they've just kind of gone half-assed with that. I don't know. There was 3 words in there. Hi. Hi, mystery caller. The question was, thanks. Is there a specified time about when the cache login expires or when the notification gets displayed? It's not documented. Undefined. What the hell are you doing? If you have a developer sign in, would it be considered dev null? Couldn't tell you. Let's just dig into a little bit on Adobe IDs and CC 2019, I think. So again, a lot of thanks goes to Neil for this, for doing the hard work here. When a user launches a CC 2019 app for the first time on that Mac, they'll be prompted to log into the Apple ID. If that's otherwise cancelled or ignored, the app will not work. Apps, I should say, the whole suite, depending on what you deployed, but yeah, the whole thing doesn't work. If this uses the Adobe CC desktop app, so anyone who's ripping that app out of their deployments or otherwise not deploying it, you can have a bad time. It's just, that's required for them to log in. The apps require a login to work. You do not have a working Adobe deployment if you get rid of it. So users will need enterprise or federated IDs, or actually their own ones. Talking more towards education, if they're under 13, they will definitely need one of these 2. It's probably a good idea to have one of these 2. Data control and all that, you know, it's kind of the point. And then you don't have to prompt users to create an Adobe ID. You don't have to rely on users already having an Adobe ID. You could just federate the whole lot. Job done. Using the user sync tool. Plug. You can limit what kind of Adobe IDs can log into your SDL deployments. So if you're running open access areas, or you might have users who have their own Adobe accounts, you can limit what kind of Adobe accounts can log into your deployments. You can use Kerberos to help smooth things over, sort of. If your users log into AD accounts or something like Nomad to grab Kerberos ticket, it can make things a bit easier. So first of all, this assumes you're using federated Adobe IDs and has single sign-on sorted out between your identity provider and Adobe. Rather large assumption, but Adobe has lots of KB articles if you ever want to read them or need to read them. You probably need to read them if you're doing this, to be honest. So essentially, user launches the CC 2019 app, user enters their email address, gets redirected to their IDP login page, which then completes the authentication without a password. And then the apps are licensed and ready for use. Again, massive thanks to Neil for actually figuring this out and me stealing his information. I feel an amendment coming on. If a user enters any email address that matches the domain that their account is in, anything, so gobbledygook at the domain, it will automatically switch to using the local Kerberos ticket. So you can't sign in with a different Adobe ID through this method. However, this might need clarification, if the user uses a CCDA app instead of launching an Adobe app, Kerberos doesn't work. Feature? Bug? It allows you to log in as a different account than the Kerberos ticket one. As Neil quite rightly pointed out as well, you can just use a K-destroy to destroy your local Kerberos tickets, then launch the app, and you can just authenticate as whatever Adobe ID makes sense for you. So it makes it a little bit easier. It's still a bit of a thing. At this point in time, if you want CC 2019 and you're not using named user licenses, this is what will happen. This is what you need to deal with and advise your users, customers, etc. Adobe IDs and Cloud Sync. A little bit on how those interact. Shared device license will only deal with app activations, not any storage, not any cloud storage. If you're SDL licensing your deployment and you don't activate any licenses for your Adobe IDs, they will not get any storage by default. Maybe, yeah, correct. If you don't sign any licenses. Yeah, so if you don't sign any licenses, they can use the apps, but no sync. Perfect, good. The storage comes from the Adobe ID. So if that user has a particular license, for example, if they have a 100 gig license, they'll get 100 gig storage. If they got the 2 gig license, they'll get 2 gig storage. If they end up having both, they would get 102 gig storage because the extra 2 gig. When a user logs in, and I have to take the blame for giving Neil a load of work for this because I kept chucking ideas at him to test. So by default, when you log in with Adobe ID and it has cloud storage and you've got that enabled, you've not disabled it, the Cloud Sync will create a local folder and start a downward sync at login, at the Adobe login to clarify. And again, you can disable that Cloud Sync if you wish. Don't mess with the folder. This is where I stepped in and gave Neil some really random tasks that end up breaking a user account, sort of. If you don't like this sync folder, but you want to use the apps that you sync, don't have scripts that just randomly trash the contents of the folder. I believe the fix was to delete the local account entirely and restart the Mac. Any other combination broke the local sync. Is that a question or are you just resting? He's enjoying. Also, if you have scripts and things like that that trash an entire user folder at logout or at periodic times, that kind of stuff, if you don't restart between trashing a specific user's folder and that user then logs in, it will also balk up the Cloud Sync. So don't do that. Or put a restart in there afterwards. Mixed results. Undefined. Undefined behavior. Thank you very much, Neil, for taking the bullet for that one. Sorry for trashing a couple of user accounts. Cool. This is a little bit bitty because I'm trying to get across a lot of information to you folks. I could do with making it sillier, but it's just, well, no, the click's not working, so there we go. So it is a bit dull, I do apologise, but it's important information. Migrating your licenses. So we're going to have a lot of changes. Let's talk about actually doing the task and the kind of gotchas around that. Serial number licenses, buy new ones. There is no migration. Buy a new serial number license from, buy a new shared device license. Don't buy another serial number license. That's not going to work with 2019. Buy a new SDL from Adobe or your favorite reseller of choice. Go on your merry way. I believe this is the situation Neil's currently in where you've got a spare, you've been using serial number licenses, so you've got spare SDLs without migrating. So you've got some from the agreement. So again, talk to your Adobe reps. You get both. So talk to your Adobe reps. You hopefully will get some you can mess around with before you click the big red button. And the serial number will continue to work with CCP with 2018. Glad I got Neil here, thank you. Bit collaborative. So for migrating legacy device licenses, you need to migrate via the admin web console. Here's the big interesting thing. I'm going to put this up and leave it there for a little bit. When you click that migrate button, any existing device license deployments will stop working within 30 days. My understanding is that's 30 calendar days, not like working days or working hours, or it's fine, just don't worry about it. When you click that migrate button, you need to be ready to move your client devices over to SDL from DL. It's one way only, no rollbacks, no takebacks. When you finish watching this very draft presentation, go to all the URLs, do all the reading, do all the watching you can, be prepared. Bear in mind your licenses will continue working until the expiry date, so don't feel pressured to do this migration right now if you don't feel ready. if you're an academic, you've got a potentially largish summer period where you're not likely to have users in seats using computers, where you can then have a bit more time to kind of play with things and get them really perfect. But there was a lot of reading. At the end of this, I collated all the URLs I read and videos I watched, and I think it was about 10 to 15 different links that we going over a blog post. Some of them overlaps, a lot of them don't. Just bear that in mind. Enough of that. Let's give some helpful stuff. Some general tips and hints for deployment. The official KB articles do state that previous licenses need to be removed before you deploy your SDL. In practice, thanks Neil, you can deploy an SDL over a serial number license of 2018 or older, if you still got older, without any issues. And essentially, if you launch a 2019 app, you'll be asked to log in as expected. If you launch a 2018 app, you don't have to log in, but you could then at that point and then get a bit of both for the features in that one. This is also the same with named user licenses of 2018 and 2019. Please test it. Don't just blat it out on a Friday afternoon before you go down to the pub or from the pub. So because we haven't actually had a chance to test this as well, it's unknown whether device licenses of 2018 will work if you redeploy the SDL license over the top for 2019. The current theory being based on documentation that because that DL license will expire within 30 days, that you should basically remove 2018 if you're moving to SDL 2019 from a DL of 2018. It's a lot of acronyms. Does that kind of make sense? Bit gibberish? I can't swear, I'm on camera and microphone. I shouldn't swear, really. But I do, why not? It's me. SDL only, you can build your license only packages for SDL, which is quite handy. You can change an existing 2019 deployment to an SDL deployment. So for example, you could deploy, in a minute, named user license of 2019, and in any labs you have on top of that, you could then just deploy the SDL licensor, and that could then save you on some storage space. You're not doubling up on packages, things like Photoshop 2019. You just have an unlicensed or an NUL license, Photoshop 2019, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And over the top, deploy an SDL license, and that will then convert that to SDL. 500 meg for the, yes, sorry, 500 meg for the SDL license file. That's some kind of amazing, like, I assume it's got CCDA and things like that in it, but it's one big license file. Yes. Undefined. I haven't checked. It's a package. It's a package. I've just remembered. Thanks, Neil. Thanks again, Neil. It's a bundle. It's a bundle. It's a bundle package, the license installer. It is not a flat package, so there may be additional work involved still on that. They're trying. It's a progress. It's better than 2018. It's a step forward for the better, sort of. Anyway. So as with previous uninstallers, SDL uninstallers will remove any apps it installed as well, depending on which one you run. So just be careful of that kind of a workflow if you're using it. It can leave the CCDA behind. So bear that in mind as well. You may have some sort of manual cleanup, perhaps, if you were to rip out 2019. It keeps going. SDL deployments will hide the apps section in the CCDA. And there'll be no option for users to install apps and or updates. It kind of feels like Adobe have not quite hard locked it, but kind of hard locked this app into a typical shared lab environment, which would normally include not letting the end users download additional apps, updates, that kind of stuff. So it kind of makes sense. There is tips for editing the XML for the CCDA in previous versions. It's unknown if that would work, if that would modify this behavior. I kind of hope not, because this feels very intentional. So be interesting to test. If anyone does that and finds out, we'll see you up here next time. So it puts the presumption of updating on the admin. The admin has to do some work to keep them up to date, not the end user, because that worked in labs anyway. Yeah, fair point, fair point. Bring it on. So now I've kept you all nice and awake with really exciting and fun slides with hardly any words and lots of pretty pictures. Sorry. Let's give you something a bit more tangible, a bit more usable. So migration paths. These are obviously suggestions. Do test your own workflows. Make sure they work for you and all your customers. Don't take my word for it. No liability, blah, blah, blah. And talk to your Adobe reps as well. Even potentially reach out to them before you do this kind of work, because they might be able to offer further advice, bits and pieces that I don't know, which can fill quite a few books. Anyway, named user license. So steps here: ensure your users have Adobe IDs of the correct license. Deploy to CC 2019. There is no step 3. That's it. Nice and straightforward. Someone got the Jamf joke. Migrating your serial number licenses. Bit more work. So create Adobe IDs for your users. Whether this is manual because you really hate yourself, or you've got a new intern that's got nothing better to do, or you go down the much better route of using the user sync tool that Neil talked about. I imagine long term that's a much better option, to be honest. Give Adobe fistfuls of money in exchange for SDLs. Build your deployment packages. Optional, depending on your rollouts, removing your existing CC deployments. And deploy your apps in the SDL. Quite straightforward-ish. I've organized these in kind of ascending difficulty or workload. Or risk, I suppose, would be a better option. So device licenses, last one. It's not too different from serial number licenses, as you can imagine. The biggest thing being that big red button of migration. So, same as before, create Adobe IDs for users. Click the big red button. 30 days start now. Build your packages. Remove your existing deployments as per the KB article. Again, not been tested, not doing this, but just bear that in mind. Deploy the new stuff. Nice and shiny. Cool. Those are the 3 main workflows I could think of for migration. Any questions about that before I move on to the next bit, which is like 3 slides, not a lot? Or any other scenarios that people are aware of that might need to be included before I give this to other people? Room of silence. Good, I think. Cool. Thanks and credit. So, couldn't do this without a couple of people. Neil did almost the entirety of the work that I then stole and put into slides. Ben, who did some more work and kicked me in the arse to do this and then fell asleep against the fridge. It's not that bad, is it? Is it? He's hiding. And everyone in the Adobe channel on the Mac Admin Slack. Absolutely amazing. Chucking ideas, suggestion, comments. And I think I've actually put that glossary slide in there, and mixture of thanks and ridicule for doing it. Right. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, you guys, for that. Any questions? That's the bit that will be replaced with a valid URL. Wednesday evening. I will deliver this Wednesday 7, 8-ish, so it'll be up after that. And there'll be a list of further reading and long links and URLs and stuff. Any questions on this madness? Is that no questions because there isn't any questions, or no questions that people want to go to the pub? It's dry as hell. I wrote it, haven't had a chance to snazz it up. I don't know if I can snazz it up much, but it's never my fault. I've learned that. It's always someone else's. It's a bit hot in here. Maybe later. that better? Anyway, sorry. Any questions? Any questions at all? Oh, had to be one. The question was, what's Adobe? If you know what Adobe is, I think you got away there. I think you should be blessed. Cool. Are we all okay with that? Well, not okay is probably the wrong word. I think a lot of people aren't okay with that, but it's happening. We have to deal with it. Discount codes? That make everyone feel better? So I guess we all good? Pub?